CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories. At least 20,000 people are ordered to leave the capital of Canada's Northwest Territories due to wildfires. From Greece to Hawaii, wildfires are proving fatal to both man and nature. So what impact is this having on the environment? Our other headlines, Pedro Sanchez's hopes of securing another term as Spanish Prime Minister are boosted as his candidate for Speaker of Congress is elected. And West African military chiefs say all options remain on the table to reverse the coup in Niger, despite some resistance to military intervention. Wildfires have swept through parts of Canada and Spain. In Canada's Northwest Territories, nearly 20,000 people in the capital, Yellowknife, have been moved to safety and a state of emergency declared as the country grapples with its worst forest fire season. Meanwhile, firefighters are struggling to contain raging wildfires in Spain's well-known tourist destination of Tenerife. Officials there say it's out of control. Our correspondent Siobhan McCall reports.
Holy.
Wildfires sweep through Canada's vast Northwest Territories, destroying one remote community and posing a risk to regional capital Yellowknife, which has a population of about 20,000 people. The authorities have ordered residents to evacuate the city and several smaller communities nearby.
There is a possibility that without rain, the fire reaches the outskirts of Yellowknife by the weekend. It is approaching, but there's time to complete the community evacuation. It's being called now so that we can allow people the opportunity to drive while the highway is open. The highway is subject to closures at any time, but it's likely that it'll be open until tomorrow morning.
Canada is suffering its worst wildfire season, with over 1,000 active fires across the country, including about 230 in the Northwest Territories. On the Spanish island of Tenerife, a major tourist destination, firefighters are also battling wildfires, which have been raging since Wednesday. The fires broke out in a mountainous national park. So far, 1,800 hectares of land have been affected.
We started operations to back up what our colleagues had done, but we came to a site where the fire had jumped the line and is now dropping into an area with a lot of boulders and a lot of loose material. Rocks are coming down and could cause us safety problems.
The head of the regional government says the fire is out of control and the outlook is not exactly very positive. A heat wave in the Canary Islands last week left many areas bone dry, and that has been blamed on climate change. Siobhan McCall, CGTN.
Well, search efforts continue in Hawaii's Lahaina more than a week after wildfires destroyed most of the historic town. The death toll has now reached 111. It's unclear how many people are still missing. The estimate stands at around 1,000. Identifying the victims is proving difficult. Hawaii's Governor Josh Green says more help is on the way.
38% of the territory has been covered. They are adding a significant force on the ground. So they are now up to 30 dogs. They'll move to 40. There's now going to be another about 225 relief individuals coming. That's 3 teams of 75. The capacity is increasing continuously to make sure that we can go to every corner of the disaster site.
Stefan Doe is Professor of Wildlife Science at Swansea University in Wales and the Editor-in-Chief of the International Journal of Wild and Fire. Professor, welcome to the programme. What are the key contributors on the occurrence and spread of wildfire, particularly in places like Hawaii?
Yeah, what we see in the news is basically dried out fuel in many places, fuel being the forest, or in the case of Hawaii, mainly shrubs and grasses. In Tenerife, it's again forest at the moment. And if these become relatively dry, like we see in the summer, especially in some of the dry areas now in Canada, these become very flammable. If we then have a lightning ignition or human ignition, perhaps a failed power line, perhaps a burn of vegetation, a human burn of vegetation getting out of control, we're getting these fires. What we are seeing, or what we've seen in Hawaii, is a very unfortunate combination of very, very strong winds and very flammable vegetation, and that has led to this really, really tragic event.
And it's a difficult, broad question, but broadly, what does wildfire mean to the natural world in terms of flora and fauna? Is this terminal or temporary?
Well, in most cases, this is very temporary. If we go to Canada, for example, Canada burns every year, except that the area that's affected by a particular fire usually has maybe 50, 60 or 100 years to recover. Those trees, in fact, need fire to rejuvenate. But if fires are too frequent or too extensive, then the recovery can take very long. Hawaii is a different story, though, because Hawaii does have naturally occurring fires, but not very frequently. So that means the vegetation does not need to adapt to fire, and therefore the damage can be higher. Now, fortunately, in Hawaii, I would say the area affected by fire has been mainly grass and shrub covered. Grasses recover really, really quickly after fire. Trees can take much longer. I would expect the palm trees that we've seen burnt most of those will recover, but nevertheless, I mean, plants and animals, particularly in Hawaii, will take some time to recover from this really dramatic event.
How has climate change affected the patterns of wildfires in Hawaii, and what are the implications for the future of these areas?
Now, Hawaii has a dry season, but this dry season has become drier in recent decades, and also what we've seen in the last 100 years or so is that the area burned has increased by about to 400% from what it used to be. So we're definitely seeing a change. This is partially due to climate change, but it's also partially due to the land being more flammable because we have more grasses in the landscape compared to the forest we had in the past. It's worth adding here, though, that globally, due to climate change, the season in which fires tend to be common, the fire weather window or the fire weather season basically has increased globally on average by 27% since the late 1970s. So we're really seeing, at least on average around the world, a strong increase in the conditions where fires are likely. We then add on to this a lightning ignition or human ignition, then again, we could have the recipe for disaster if it's very windy. And we're seeing this in many places around the world now, very unfortunately.
Professor, good to talk to you. Thanks very much for coming on the programme. Professor Steffan Doer from Swansea University in Wales. Now, the rest of the day's news, and Pedro Sanchez's hopes of securing another term as Spanish Prime Minister have been boosted as his candidate for Speaker of Congress has been elected. Francina Armengol received an outright majority of votes after Catalan nationalists supported Sanchez's Socialist Workers' Party by throwing their support behind her. Let's talk to our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels. Alex, just how significant is this in terms of trying to form a government?
Well, Jamie, it's significant in that it shows the Catalan Junts Party is willing to work with Pedro Sanchez's Socialist Party when it comes to putting together votes in Parliament. That is the first significant step. It'll also be a real sigh of relief for the outgoing and possibly soon to be incumbent and renewed Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, because he's been working on this agreement for weeks. Now, at the end of last month's inconclusive election, you basically had a bit of a tie between the right-wing party and Pedro Sanchez's Socialist Party, along with the far left and a coalition of other smaller parties. They both had a combined 171 votes in Parliament, or MPs in Parliament, I should say. Now, that Junts Party, that Catalan Independence Party, has 7 MPs that could really make the difference for Pedro Sanchez. Now, there have been a lot of negotiations to get us to this point. We know that some concessions have been made by Pedro Sanchez, mostly promoting the Catalan language in the Spanish Congress, but also investigating or further investigating the Pegasus scandal, which Catalan leaders say the Israeli spyware Pegasus was used to spy and hack into their phones. So that was one of the concessions made. We look forward. Will there be more concessions to add for that Pedro Sanchez government to be formed? That's what we'll hear in the next few weeks before that crucial vote in Parliament, Jamie.
And they'll be watching in EU HQ. How is this agreement going to be viewed?
Well, it'll be viewed first and foremost by Carles Puigdemont, the leader of the Junts Party, who is self-exiled here in Belgium. He's just down the road in Waterloo in the Catalan House, as it's called. He will be looking at this very closely and deciding whether or not to react to those propositions by Pedro Sanchez, the outgoing Spanish Prime Minister. Now, on the EU side, this could be a little tricky, actually, because Spain has the rotating presidency of the European Council at the moment, and they may concede pushing the Catalan language to become an official EU language. That would be greeted quite frostily here in Brussels, because it opens a bit of a Pandora's box for other separatist areas or separatist movements across Europe who might want to see their language an official European language or promote their cause for separatist or independence causes around. Even here in Belgium, the Flemish movement might push for Flemish to be an official language. In North Cyprus, there may be tensions, or at least more debate brought on by concessions to the Catalans. So this is the nature of the European Union. Everything is interlinked, so that coalition might be a bit more of a problem for Pedro Sanchez here in Brussels.
Alex, thank you for that. Our correspondent Alex Cadier in Brussels. Rescuers in India's Himachal Pradesh are still digging through mud in search of survivors after landslides killed as many as 70 people. Only a dozen bodies have been recovered so far at the site of a temple which collapsed. Torrential rain triggered flash flooding and landslides in the Himalayan region at the weekend. At least 63 people are feared dead after a boat capsized off the coast of Cape Verde in West Africa. 38 survivors were rescued from the vessel that left Senegal in July, headed for Spain's Canary Islands. It's one of the world's most dangerous routes. Nearly 600 people died attempting to reach the islands last year. Police in Pakistan have arrested more than 120 Muslims after a mob attacked churches and homes of minority Christians in the city of Jaranwala. No one was injured in the attack, which was sparked by an alleged desecration of the Quran. The authorities ordered in troops to try to restore order. Police in Singapore have seized around $735 million worth of goods, including luxury homes, cars and watches, in one of the country's biggest anti-money laundering probes. At least 10 people have been arrested, all of whom held foreign passports. Large-scale raids are rare in Singapore, which is one of the world's lowest crime rates. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, bringing ballet to the streets of Peru, the woman offering the girls of Lima the chance to dance.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
This week on Razor, searching for dark matter on the ground and far out in space.
Dark matter, we know, is kind of matter that does not interact through the electromagnetic interaction with ordinary matter. And we know that such a specific kind of exotic matter exists from various cosmological evidence, astrophysical evidence, but we don't know what it's made of.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. At least 20,000 people are ordered to leave the capital of Canada's Northwest Territories due to wildfires. Our other headlines: Pedro Sanchez's hopes of securing another term as Spanish Prime Minister are boosted as his candidate for Speaker of Congress is elected. West African military chiefs say all options remain on the table to reverse the military coup in Niger. ECOWAS leaders have been meeting in Ghana to try to find a way forward on the crisis, almost a month after Niger's military detained President Mohamed Bazoum. The regional bloc has previously vowed to use force, if necessary, to return the democratically elected leader to power, but some African countries oppose this.
Push comes to shove, we are going into Niger with our own contingent-owned equipment. We are going with our own resources and to make sure that we restore constitutional order.
Our correspondent Deji Bademosi reports now from Lagos in neighboring Nigeria.
The meeting of the regional defense chiefs is crucial. They're expected to discuss everything from contribution of troops by member countries to the financing and logistics of the standby force. At their last summit in Abuja, ECOWAS leaders had said they hoped to resolve the political standoff in Niger diplomatically. But by pressing ahead with the activation of the standby force, they appear to be deploying the carrot and stick approach as they seek to reverse the coup in Niger.
On paper, the standby brigade for West Africa of about, I think, 1,700 troops from the 15 countries, different ratios of of contribution. That is supposed to be a brigade that is even on standby here in Abuja. Abuja is supposed to be the headquarters of that ECOWAS standby brigade. But to my own understanding, it is not as if physically the troops are there. And we have like 4 or 5 of the countries that are supposed to have contributed, like, you know, Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, who are already having military, regimes in their countries. They are not likely to contribute. So the question to ask is that where is that brigade going to come from? Are the countries that are willing now going to make up the numbers?
The Nigerian military junta has said it's now open to dialogue with ECOWAS, but it is also consolidating its hold on power. Its leader, General Abdulrahman Tiani, has already appointed ministers, and on Tuesday, its military-appointed prime minister was in charge to meet with President Mahamat Idris Deby, in yet another sign that the new government is entrenching itself in Niamey. The junta has also said it has enough evidence to prosecute ousted and detained democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum for what it calls high treason and undermining state security. ECOWAS has warned that it is not going to accept that. Deji Bademasi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, the United Nations says the ongoing crisis could significantly worsen food insecurity in Niger. It's calling for humanitarian exemptions to sanctions and border closures to avert catastrophe. Millions of people face hunger in Niger, and the situation is getting worse as a result of the current crisis. Food aid is still being delivered in parts of the country, but the UN says more financial support is needed.
According to the World Food Programme, some 7.3 million food insecure people could see their situation worsen due to the unfolding crisis. Humanitarian exemptions to sanctions and border closures are required to avert a rapid deterioration of the food security and malnutrition situation. The response plan for Niger currently seeks $584 million in funding, but only 39% of that has been received.
Ukraine says it's made gains in the eastern Donetsk region, taking back control of a village after days of intense fighting with Russian ground troops. Military chiefs say Ukrainian forces are consolidating their positions around Urozhain. It's part of a wider push to regain control of the nearby city of Melitopol, which remains in Moscow's hands. Ukraine says it has no hope of using American-made F-16 fighter jets this year. Washington has backed plans to train Ukrainian pilots to fly the jets, which President Volodymyr Zelensky says could transform the outcome of this conflict. But Moscow has warned that the transfer of the planes carries colossal risks for Kyiv. Air Force chiefs have now conceded the F-16 jets are unlikely to be supplied by Western backers in the coming months. The Russian ruble has gained ground against the dollar. It follows speculation that capital controls were being considered to prop up the struggling currency. Russia's President Vladimir Putin met central bank policymakers on Wednesday to discuss support measures for the ruble, which fell to a 16-month low earlier this week. Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Dasha, do we know what happened at this meeting between President Putin and central bankers, and what, if anything, they agreed?
Well, as we understand, the Russia's Vedomosti newspaper has been citing the sources, but says that Russia will not tighten capital control measures. We understand that the Russian president has indeed had a meeting with the cabinet ministers as well as the head of Russia's central bank, Elvira Nabiullina, on Wednesday to hear the proposals on converting the foreign currency earnings held by the exporters into the Russian rubles. At the moment, we understand there was the preliminary agreement between the government and these exporters. They have informally agreed to raise foreign currency sales, and that will be allowing the government to avoid the last resort option of actually imposing those capital controls. Just to remind you, these capital controls were the instrument that was used by the Russian government in the early months and the early weeks of Russia's so-called special military operation, when the Russian ruble tumbled and lost most of its value. So certainly this is one of the measures that is being discussed, but at the moment we are seeing the Russian central bank raising the key interest rate to 12% from 8.5%. And at first this measure did not really work. We have seen the Russian ruble losing all the gains that it has made. But now, as these conversations are now in the air, certainly we are seeing the Russian ruble strengthening and gaining more value.
And a Russian court has fined Google for what it says is not deleting misleading material about the conflict in Ukraine.
That's right. We understand that the Russian authorities have been fining the Western IT companies for not deleting the materials that are classified here in Russia as disinformation and misinformation about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. We understand that the fine of 3 million Russian rubles, that is roughly $32,000 has imposed against Google, the company that owns YouTube, for not deleting the materials that are deemed as the ones misleading the Russians. Particularly, we understand there were also the materials that have been suggesting ways of gaining the entry to the facilities which are not open to minors. And Russia says YouTube was reluctant to delete these materials. We understand from the Russian prosecutors that the presence of the young children and minors at these sites could be dangerous for their health, and that's why they have been demanding YouTube to delete those. Earlier this year, we have seen YouTube once again being fined in Russia for the discreditation of the Russian army, but also for releasing and not deleting the videos that are believed to be the propaganda of not traditional relations. So in Russia, there is this sort of issue with the Western companies when the Russian authorities are demanding to delete certain materials. Reddit was fined most recently as it was also spreading misinformation and disinformation about the Russian military campaign in Ukraine. So certainly this is yet another fine that has been issued to a foreign company.
Dasha, thank you for that. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Now, you usually find ballet in posh theatres with tickets costing a small fortune. For many, it's simply out of bounds. But in Peru, one woman is inspiring a generation of girls to put their best foot forward. CGTN's correspondent Dan Collins reports now from Lima.
Arriba, jalen arriba, jalen, jalen. Ballet can be practiced in the most unlikely of places. All you need is a bar to grip and a teacher like Mary Carmen Silva. She's prepared to put her students through their paces whenever and wherever they may be. Life can be tough in San Genaro, a neighborhood on the southern end of Lima. But retired dance teacher Mary Carmen Silva decided that that shouldn't stop these girls from having dreams of a future in ballet. In Silva, a former professional ballet dancer, the students have found a teacher who believes in them.
Bueno, principalmente porque antes el ballet lo tenía como un hobby.
Before I treated ballet like a hobby. Now with Miss Mari Carmen, it's part of my life. I dedicate a lot of time and effort to it. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense.
But they have to overcome obstacles in order to dance. This poor neighborhood lacks basic services like water, and getting anywhere else takes time. 13-year-old Ashley Tavara moved to Peru from Venezuela 5 years ago and has just started dancing.
Me ha enseñado muchas cosas, como ser una niña resiliente.
Ballet has taught me many things, like how to be a resilient girl at such a young age. I've learned to be a fighter. I've learned how to look after myself on the street.
For 15-year-old
Nicole Chavez, ballet is an escape.
Siento como una gran felicidad cuando bailo. Siento que
I feel great happiness when I dance. I feel that I can breathe well. I feel like I'm in another world and everything else disappears.
nací en otro mundo y todo lo demás desaparece.
Her younger sister Kate also dances, and their mother Elcida is relieved it keeps them out of trouble.
Aquí, por ejemplo, en este lugar.
Here there are girls who are my daughter's age, who are involved in drugs and getting drunk at all-night parties. It makes me sad. They were friends with my daughters when they were little. Fortunately, my girls don't have time for such things. The ballet protects them from many negative things.
Together, Silva, Ruiz and other relatives raise money for classes, transportation and even competitions abroad by recycling paper and plastic.
Lo que para unos es basura.
What for some is rubbish, for us is the way we get money to do our exams for the Royal Academy of Dance, to travel and sometimes to get a ticket to commute from one side of Lima to the other.
At the dance studio, Silva makes space also for students who are physically challenged. Lucia Viacava has cerebral palsy, but she doesn't let that get in the way of her passion for ballet. Her mother, Hilda Buller, says her daughter, now 15, has been in love with it ever since she was 6.
I feel that in this group they are much more integrated, much more connected. She feels part of the group. Once you join it, everybody starts to help.
She says her daughter's motor and communication skills have improved thanks to the classes.
No todas de repente tienen el físico perfecto.
Not everyone has the perfect physique or the perfect physical condition, but if they start working, they start to achieve what they can. It also teaches them that tomorrow, when they know what they want to do, with effort, work and discipline, they can achieve it.
Thanks to fundraising efforts, Silva has taken her dancers to perform in Panama, Brazil and the US. Now with upcoming exams for the Royal Academy of Dance, the girls are focused on their dreams. Dan Collins, CGTN, Lima.
The headlines again. At least 20,000 people have been ordered to leave the capital of Canada's Northwest Territories due to wildfires. Our other headlines, Pedro Sanchez's hopes of securing another term as Spain's Prime Minister are boosted as his candidate for Speaker of Congress is elected. And West African military chiefs say all options remain on the table to reverse the military coup in Niger, despite some resistance to military intervention. And that is The World Today. Thank you for watching. There's more on CGTN Europe's channel on the Telegram app, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.